Jnanavaca, either from on the back of what he was talking about before the break or anything else. Doesn't matter. I was just asking about his socks, but that's not a suggestion.
Yeah, we can talk about that if you want.
So yes, who would like to kick off?
I'll kick off. Yeah, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed it. Yeah. Yeah, I was interested in your request for a teaching on Jnanavaca.
Yeah.
And whether, well, I suppose two parts, but have you reflected on that since that experience any more? And was there something in that that you were grasping at some, you asked 3 times. I was told that you need to ask the Buddha 3 times and then he'll give you an answer. But yeah, what was underneath that request
I see, yeah.
for wanting more? And then when you got the answer, have you reflected more deeply on what was underneath that response you got?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thank you for asking that, Robert. I don't completely know what was underneath the asking for teaching. I think partly it must have been like, what do I do now with Padmasambhava looking at me and not sort of saying anything. What do you do? And probably there was a sense of, why is he here? Why has he appeared? But maybe if I think about it, there's if I think about my Dharma life, my life, I am often sort of trying to ask for guidance. In a certain sense, I was talking at the end about those models and myths. One of the ways of practicing that feels intuitively I respond to is this surrender myth of opening up to something beyond me and asking for guidance and asking for the Dharma to come through me, and in a way trying to get out of my own way for that, if you see what I mean. There's a certain sense in which I don't really know how best to contribute, and I'm sort of trying to be receptive to something beyond me. That's what I'm trying to say. So I think that's been a strand of my Dharma life from the very beginning, and even from before I started practicing Buddhism. I think, well, as I was sort of saying, I intuited that there was something more going on, as it were, in reality, in life. And I was always sort of looking for that to reveal itself to me and guide me. I mean, as a kid, I can remember sort of standing in front of bookshelves in bookshops, waiting for the right book to leap out at me, as if I was going to be guided by. Do you know what I mean? And most of the time, nothing happened. But occasionally, things did happen in my life which felt more than coincidence, as if I had been given these opportunities. And I think if I look back on my Dharma life, it's felt like that. I've been offered all these opportunities rather than, and I've said yes. My job has been to say yes, or sometimes I've said no, but mostly I've said yes, rather than, I haven't particularly been very active in shaping my Dharma life, if that makes sense. Now that's a fault as well as a strength. There are pros and cons. It's just, so I think asking for guidance is part of how I so right, recently Jnanavaca was just saying, I've just come back from a college meeting where we were selecting the next chair of the college, and my name was in the frame, and I've not wanted to do that, and I've been thinking about not wanting to do it for some years, and I have had to wrestle with, is it just me not wanting to do it out of laziness and preference and personal preference, or is it really not the best thing for me to be doing? Is it not the best way of me serving the Dharma? And I've been asking for guidance for years from Bhante and that's in my meditation, but also my own preceptor Subhuti. I sort of asked him what he thinks and so forth. And so that's been a way of working. I think it's quite natural to me. It isn't for everybody. Does that help?
It does. Can I give you slightly my interpretation?
Yeah, go on.
Very quickly, that you were given Bhante, and that's kind of led to your life.
Yes, exactly.
And is that not enough?
Exactly. That's exactly what that's how the response, I interpret the response. And I also, for me, I see Bhante as I say, at these different levels.
Yeah.
There was a sort of human Bhante in his human form, and then there is for me what he was in touch with, and in a certain sense there's that sort of archetypal teacher in Bhante.
Thank you.
Good.
What else have we got? David.
Hi there, David.
So you said when you read the memoirs of Sangharakshita, you thought, oh, actually, I don't really like this guy. And I thought that was very interesting. Like, I find it very hard to kind of learn from teachers if I don't like them. Like, how do you overcome that?
How do you? Yeah. Well, it wasn't my only response. It was just one of the responses I had at one point in the memoirs. So it wasn't my only response, and I've read them several times and had different responses. They're very, very rich memoirs in a very, very rich and multifaceted life. But to get to the point, yes, Bhante's personality I didn't always find easy, and but I've always kind of tried to look beyond personality. There were other aspects of his personality that I thought were incredible and sort of like amazing. But I didn't always, well, for example, he didn't always make it easy. I'll tell you, he could be a challenging teacher. He wasn't like, I know this isn't your question, but I'll get on to that. You know how some Buddhists immediately seem like they're cuddly Buddhists? But like Dalai Lama feels like that, doesn't he? And Thich Nhat Hanh, I never met Thich Nhat Hanh, never met the Dalai Lama, but their public persona is very much like a cuddly, warm, genial Buddhist who will always be nice. Bhante wasn't like that. He was more like a challenging figure. And so for example, I once went to see him, and one of the questions I foolishly asked was, Bhante, what would you say the essential difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is? Now, I had some sort of, again, meditative experience, and I wanted to clarify how that was categorized, etc. But it was a sloppy question, because what's he meant to say at such a big kind of question? And besides, I could have gone and read about it if I wanted to. So he just said to me, what sort of Hinduism do you have in mind, Jnanavaca? Do you have? And he sort of listed all these different aspects of Hinduism and these different kind of traditions of Hinduism, and from popular Hinduism. So what sort of school of Hinduism did you have in mind? And I said, well, I don't know. I was thinking Vedanta Hinduism, Vedanta. What do you think about Vedanta? So he said, there are 5 types of Vedanta Jnanavaca, and then he listed all 5 different types of Vedantic Hinduism, including their founders and their fundamental metaphysical positions, which are all different. And he said, so which type of Vedanta did you have in mind, Jnanavaca? And I was like, I don't know, let's just change the subject. And I think what he was doing in that, well, partly it was a sloppy question, and he was sort of getting me to think more clearly and be more clear about what question am I really asking. Throwing it back at me, not doing the sort of cuddly teacher role. Does that make sense? It was more of a challenging role. And I think that was an aspect of his personality, so that you walked into the room with a slight sense of, you had to be on your mettle, because he was on his mettle all the time. It was like he was so aware and sharp, and his memory was so good, you had to be on your toes. You know, it was like he demanded that. There was a challenge in meeting Dante. It was an implicit challenge, and sometimes it was a bit more explicit. But his very being seemed to have a challenge in it, like he had lived his life. He was very much himself, and there was a challenge in that. Can you be yourself? Not like all the social niceties, you know, we put on a front when we meet each other sometimes, and it was like he didn't quite do that. And there's a challenge in that when you meet somebody very real, who's being very real and being themselves, that can be a bit unnerving. A bit like the gaze of Padmasambhava that just looks directly at you. So to come on to your second thing, I think if we're serious about this Adama life, we're here to grow and learn, not just here to have a cozy time. And sometimes the people that we're learning from won't allow us just to have a cozy time. So sometimes they will challenge us, and we won't necessarily always like that. And that's part of how we grow and learn. So that might be a part of your question. Another part is that actually personality, likes and dislikes, your sense of humour, what sort of music you like or something, is irrelevant to, in a way, much of what spiritual growth is really about. So sometimes people say, oh, I don't like this personality, or I want this sort of, and it's sort of irrelevant. It's not, you know, say you had and that's true in any kind of secular school as well. Say you were training to be a mathematician, you don't necessarily want the nice teacher. You wouldn't choose a maths teacher just because they were nice. You might, but you wouldn't necessarily. I mean, an example comes to mind. My sister had cancer some years ago, and her oncologist was renowned for being bad-tempered and impatient, and you know, the opposite of a lovely bedside manner, and unsentimental. And if you asked him what your prognosis was, he would tell you. He wouldn't sugarcoat things, and yet he was the best available oncologist at that. You know, and she was asked, "Do you want him?" And she was said, "Yes. You know, I want the best. I want the best guy." Do you know what I mean? So never mind whether you like him or not. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so.
I guess reality is not always going to be nice to us, is it? And even if it's got our best intentions, someone's got our best intentions that might be at odds with what we feel like at the time, or what we prefer. Yeah.
And I think our order is a bit like that, isn't it, at times?
Mm-hmm.
If you join the order, somebody, you know, early on, somebody said to me, you know, the order isn't full of nice people, and it isn't. I don't like our order at times. It's challenging, it's robust. What people are trying to do in our order is be genuine, be honest. I think I can trust most order members pretty much all the time to be genuine, honest. That isn't always easy.
Great, thank you. Do we have another question from Jnanavaca?
Well, I have a question, but on what you just said about sloppy questions.
No, but
Everyone's like, I want to ask one now.
Sorry. I promise I'll be nice. I'll try and be nice.
Bit more rigid.
What's the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism?
Since your involvement with Sri Ratna, your spiritual development, what fears or wobbles or problems have you come up against? Or has it just been like a flight of an arrow? Have you just known and that's it?
What fears and wobbles? I don't think I've ever particularly had doubts about the Dharma. I don't think I've had doubts about Bhante and his genuineness as a teacher and as a Dharma practitioner. I have at times got into conflict in the Sangha, in our Sangha, in our order and movement. Sometimes I've made myself unpopular and people have found me difficult or whatever, and I've got into conflict. Sometimes I've disagreed with. I think part of what I found most difficult is part of taking responsibility in our Sangha means that you have to make decisions, and not everybody is going to like the decisions that you make, and you will at times be unpopular, and I found that at times difficult. Because I talked about this example before, just to go back to it. So I was chair of the LBC when we decided to build the new Vajrasana building, the new complex. And we went through with that. Now that cost £5.5 million, and we managed to find the money mainly because we'd been left by an order member called Mahananda a bequest in his will, and when he died we inherited a large property in St John's Wood that gave us the majority of the money that enabled us to build this retreat centre. But anyway, there were people in the order who really didn't think that it was appropriate for us to be spending that sort of money. The LBC there were questions like, hang on, £5.5 million could go a long way in India. Our movement in India is really needing money and is growing more rapidly than anywhere in a way. And what are you doing? Do you have to do, etc.? Do you do sort of mean? And anyway, that didn't ever get unpleasant. That was a valid kind of debate. But I have, at times, had more unpleasant experiences in the Sangha. And one of the things I've had to learn is that our Sangha, including me, how else, but our order isn't perfect. It's not perfect. Bhante's not perfect. Our order's not perfect. And that I can't really go for refuge to the order. I have to become more of an individual and go for refuge to the three jewels in their transcendental dimensions, and then work with our Sangha in as harmonious and cooperative way as I can, if that makes sense. So I think through taking that's just a wee example, but there have been numerous ones, through trying to take responsibility in our order and movement, you sort of raise your head above the parapet, and we don't, although there are organisational structures, in the order there isn't that sort of hierarchy. Each order member is a free individual to live their own life and have their own views and comment in whatever way they want to. It's not like a power hierarchy, although there is some organisational structure with particular people holding particular responsibilities. And that means that it's quite a hard place to take responsibility in. So I used to work in the corporate world, and if you were a manager, a senior person, I don't know, managing an area or team, you could impose your will on the situation. You could make a decision and people would have to follow you whether they liked it or not, because their jobs were. Do you know what I mean? That was what the boss. Our order doesn't work like that, not exactly. So taking responsibility in our order, organisational responsibility in our movement, is demanding, because you can only work through consensus and cooperation and influence and friendship and support. You can't just say, right, we're going to do it my way.
I wonder if we could just come in on the back of Andy's question, actually. Like Andy mentioned like wobbles and etc. Like, what would you say to someone, anyone, me, no, like we all kind of have our stuff to work with, right?
Yeah.
And kind of, you know,
Yeah.
things that are sort of antithetical and sort of, we might really want to come to the centre, but something's going on for us, we think, oh no, I don't, can't face it, whatever. What would you say to people kind of, if there's this stuff going on that just feels like it's kind of getting in the way of our practice, whether we're up to it or...
Well, I guess one thing is, it's inevitable. We're unenlightened, I'm unenlightened, I'm not fully integrated, and yet we're trying to move towards full integration and enlightenment. So there's bound to be aspects of us that don't want to practice. So there's lots of aspects of me that still aren't practicing the Dharma. And the reason that I don't haven't seen them as a wobble is that I don't take them too seriously. I'm happy enough with not being perfect. So I think that's one thing that we could learn, is we don't have to be perfect. I can remember quite early on when I came along, Ratnagosha, who was then chair at the LBC, gave a talk, and he, in that talk, said that there were two things that he felt most people tripped over in their Dharma lives. Two things that became obstacles to their Dharma lives. One was thinking that they should be perfect, and the other was thinking other people should be perfect. Yeah. So what we do is we take these ideals of enlightenment and we apply and impose them on ourselves and other people in a rather crude, unhelpful way.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, it's much better to think, okay, well, I'm not perfect. Here I am. I've got all sorts of aspects to myself that aren't necessarily integrated. That's okay. Let's just see if we can move this whole bundle of contradictory impulses in the direction of the Dharma as best we can. Bring everything on board. So the bits of that you don't want to practice, they also need attention and looking after. Does that make sense? So, for example, if I don't want to get up in the morning, I don't get up in the morning. I meditate later on in the day. Or if I want to watch Netflix and it's not a particularly highbrow Netflix, whatever it is, that's okay. I can't always seem to read improving literature, and do you know what I mean? I'm not, I haven't become celibate, so I still have sex, and that's fine. I mean, what's the problem? So, I think one of my main sort of guiding principle is, look, I'd like to not, the sort of minimum standards of ethics that I'd like not to fall below, particularly if they're hurting other people. Yeah, I don't want to do that. But I'm not necessarily the ideal perfect practitioner or the exemplar of perfect practice, and that's okay. So I think that helps. I've had an easygoing attitude to myself. I think friendship really helps. So find people who you can trust and look up to, at least to some degree, and turn to them and ask their help and advice. I couldn't practice on my own. So I think Sangha really, really helps. Friendship really helps.
Do you have any advice on self-regulating so that you're not watching too much rubbish Netflix or staying in bed for too long?
Well, I think it's very individual, so I wouldn't want to prescribe. I think for some people, you might say one thing, and for another person, you might say it's fine. So it depends on the individual, and it depends on particular phases of their life. I don't know, a friend of mine is currently heartbroken, and he's having to work with some very, very difficult emotional stuff. And if he's watching something innocent on Netflix, that might be fine. Does that make sense? It's now I wouldn't want to put any pressure on him, and you'd want to sort of say yes and do meditate as well, etc. For myself, just speaking personally, because I've put myself into conditions where I've taken responsibility in our order and movement, and I am asked to lead retreats, meet up with people, there's a lot of external requests on me to shape up and practice, that has kept me going. So I haven't been able to go down this sort of rabbit hole of I'm just going to put my feet up all the time because I don't have the time. If that makes sense. And I've put myself in those positions where I don't have the time. And I've tried to respond when I do get requests to meet up with an individual or teach or lead a retreat, I always try and say yes. So then that stops me from getting too lazy.
So your responsibilities have kept you?
Yes, and a certain degree of, okay, I'm going to try and say yes. As best I can. So I think that helps. So I think different people, other people, there's another friend of mine who has a huge amount of motivation, self-motivation, will, drive, determination, all of those positive qualities that I don't have so much of. And he is phenomenal at being able to have a routine, discipline himself, etc. And I'm his Kalyana Mitra. And one of the things I can remember when he wasn't ordained at that time, and he said, "Look, what should I be doing?" And I was saying, I think you need to learn to waste time because you're always on the go doing something, and actually you need to just relax more, chill, waste time. Because if I'd said you need to enjoy yourself, he would have turned that into another task. Jnanavaca has told me to enjoy myself. I must find something I enjoy. I will do it on a Thursday. And I didn't mean that. I meant actually just loosen up, waste time. And I think that will help your meditation practice. Because I think sometimes meditation practice can become, for example, another good thing that we have to do.
Yeah.
I think it needs to have a flavour of play to it. It has a sense of exploration, a sense of wonder, a sense of... Bhante, has put a lot of emphasis on beauty, for example. And one of the things with beauty, with the arts, is that they're not useful. And he, one of his statements you can read is that he says the real values are aesthetic, not utilitarian. So we could turn the Dharma life into another utilitarian thing. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to be a good Buddhist. I've seen people who have asked for ordination get into, I've got to get ordained. I'm going to do all the right things to get ordained. And in doing all that, what can get lost is their love for the Dharma. So, yeah, that's a bit of a roundabout thing. But I think it's very individual. And all of us are going to find struggles in some way or other.
Yeah. It's so helpful, and I think right on the mark. It just reminds me of what Subhuti says in Mind in Harmony. It's like you get involved, and you come across the Dharma.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it's like, well, then what? What is my specific shape?
Yeah.
What am I actually like? What do I need? And what do I need to do in my practice?
Yeah.
To deepen, to grow.
Yeah. And
we can't just sort of apply. We can't apply the Dharma through our own sort of preferences, and part of how we work that out is through friendship, through communication with people that know us. And it's being specific and intentional, right, about how we practice.
And that is sometimes you say contradictory things to different people.
It's not always less Netflix. We're running out of time, but have we got another question? I've got a question. I've got a burning one. Just wondered if you could say a bit about ordination. You can't not notice. You come to the centre, and some people have got cases and funny names. People who have been ordained have chosen to get ordained. We've chosen to get ordained. Why? What can you say about the role of ordination?
Well, when I asked for ordination, I think I asked out of an intuitive sort of impulse. And it wasn't that I definitely wanted to get ordained. It wasn't like I wanted a case or a name or whatever. What I wanted was to get enlightened. And ordination was part of Intri Ratna, the path that led to deeper experiences, deeper practice. So, and I think I think that's still a way of looking at it that's helpful for me. So what I mean is, you've probably heard of Bhante having a system of practice. In Triratna, you've got a system of practice with principles like integration, positive emotion, spiritual receptivity, spiritual death, and spiritual rebirth. And at ordination, you are seen as being ready to take on certain practices that are insight practices, that are spiritual death and spiritual rebirth practices. If you don't ever take those practices on, you haven't yet seen the whole system of practice, the whole majesty of what Bhante's system offers. What his system is the wrong word, but his presentation of the Dharma offers. So it's not about joining a club, it's not about getting status or something like that. It is about going deeper in your Dharma life. And ordination in Triratna, if we didn't have an order, some other Buddhist movements don't have orders in this way, then it wouldn't matter. But in Triratna, if you're going to practice in Triratna and you really want to go all the way towards enlightenment and to transforming your life, then ordination is an essential part of that path. It's part of the structure of how Bhante set things up. So that's one thing. But that's a sort of more prosaic way of talking in a way. But there's something about having your commitment witnessed, which is what happens at ordination, that is it's got something magical about it. So something happens in that ordination ceremony where the inner being, the compass of your life is just shifted a little, and you're given a sort of a positive boost, a momentum to your practice is given a boost. You're introduced to the transcendental, if you want to put it in that way. You're introduced to some aspect of the transcendental. It's then up to you if you follow that up. So it's not all order members, unfortunately, sort of make use of their ordination and they drift away sometimes. Fortunately, the majority of order members do seem to follow through. So it's not that ordination does it for you, but it does open a door, which is not just graspable rationally. There's something magical involved in that. Karmically, for example, I think it's very, very, very significant when you make that commitment. And something else of the Dharma can come through. But I would only do it if you really want to. What do I mean by that? If you don't feel compelled to go deeper in your Dharma life towards enlightenment, then don't do it. Chogyam Trungpa used to say, apparently, if you haven't started on the path, don't start. If you have started, don't stop. Because along the way it can be quite difficult. You're asking in a way for difficulties. So you have to want to do it because you feel there's truth here, and I've always had this compulsion to try and get to the truth of things and the nature of reality, etc. I couldn't settle for the ordinary life of car, house, career, mortgage, partner, family, or whatever. As I was saying, when my dad died, that broke, that vision of life broke. So I had a compulsion. So then if somebody says to me, look, actually, this is the way to the truth, I have to follow that. But other people are not like me. You might be fine in your life, and in a way ordination might just upset the apple cart. So if it's all going fine, good luck. It might be all right, Does that make sense? And of course there are other Buddhist movements that do things differently, and it might be that you feel more at home in another Buddhist movement. What I would say is that, look, if you are drawn to the Dharma and you have this inner thing that says the Dharma is true, and I want to practice it, then find a context. If it's not Triratna, find another context where you feel at home, to use that language, and then pursue it. Because the Dharma, I think, is true. I know it's true. And if you feel an intuitive response to that, don't miss the opportunity to really explore it. Because everything else that gets in the way, I know other things get in the way, jobs and relationships and health and money and life gets in the way. I just want to urge you not to let that get in the way of an aspiration towards the truth. My dad, when he was dying on his deathbed, he was having a heart attack. He was in agony, rolling around on his deathbed, and I can remember him holding my hand and him expressing regret about his life. And one of the regrets was that he had hurt people and not been kind enough. And I can remember thinking, well, I don't know what I thought at the time, but afterwards I thought, I don't want to die with those sorts of regrets. And so for me, death and the thought of death has been always a positive spur to say, what am I doing with my life? And I want to try and live a meaningful life. And I think Triratna ordination is part of that, helps me live a meaningful life. And for that I feel so grateful. I feel blessed. I feel like incredibly grateful. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that's a good point to finish. Yeah. Thanks very much. And just as a small token of our appreciation, Jason has popped into the library. And
wow.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Wow. It's useful. Thank you.
Yeah, really great to have you, Jnanavaca. Again, thank you very much for making the journey across. Lots in what you said. It's been recorded, so we can watch it again and share it with the wider Sangha. So yeah, just thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for